"Here I am." That was Abraham's response when the Lord called him. "Here I am." It's kind of a weird way to respond to the Lord's call. It's a little indicator we have in the Old Testament. Whenever you see someone or read someone responding to the Lord with, "Here I am," we can identify that person as being a righteous man of God. But still, it's an odd way to respond when someone calls your name, "Here I am." But it also gives us an opportunity today to ask the question, where are we? Where are you? Where are you in your relationship with God? I assure you, God is calling your name. Where are you? The history of the Old Testament, the history of humankind itself, tells one of a story of humankind always drifting away from God. Ever since the fall of Adam and Eve, we, the people of God, have been drifting away from Him, and He is constantly calling us back to Him. Last weekend in our first reading, we read of the covenant God made with Noah. Today in our first reading, we have the covenant He makes with Abraham. There will come a covenant made with Moses, and God will hand to Moses His law, the Ten Commandments. It expands into the Mosaic law. And yet people, the chosen people of God, will continue to drift away from God. And so God will send prophets to teach His people and call them back to Him. And the teaching of the prophets combined with the law of Moses become the law and the prophets, the core of the Jewish faith. And we see that throughout the New Testament. As Jesus is teaching, He will say, "Well, as it is told in the law and the prophets." In these two commandments are the whole of the law and the prophets. It is the core of the Jewish faith. And God has always promised to us, to His holy people, that if you maintain a right relationship with Him, if we continue to seek Him, then He will reconcile us to Him through His Son, Jesus Christ. And in our gospel today, that reconciliation is prefigured for us in the transfiguration of Christ as He appears on the mountain with Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. And we see Jesus in His divine glory as the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, as the fulfillment of God's promise to us. And yet, even though our Lord Jesus Christ gave His life for us and rose from the dead and reconciled us to the Father, yet you and I continue to wander away from God. And so we ask ourselves again the same response, "Here I am." But where is that? Where are we? The season of Lent that we find ourselves in is a time of reflection, a time to pause, to step away from the busyness of our lives and discern where are we in relation to God. In our gospel last week, you'll recall that the Spirit drove Jesus into the desert for 40 days so He could reflect upon the ministry that He was about to embark upon. As we have entered this Lenten season, have you taken the time to wander into the desert, to spend some time in reflection of where you are in relation to God? St. Paul reminds us in our second reading today that if God is for us, who can be against us? Well, my friends, who can be against us more often than not is our own selves. So oftentimes, the person, the thing, the barrier that stands between us and a relationship with God, or a more full relationship with our God, is ourselves. And Lent is a time to discern that separation, to identify what it is that separates us from God, take ownership of what it is that is causing that separation, and to lay it on this altar and sacrifice that. Both Father Jeff and Father Steve in the last couple of weeks have been imploring us in our Lenten resolutions to not do something wimpy, to actually invest ourselves into the Lenten season so that we can draw closer to God. The Archdiocese, as we've heard in our announcements, has a reconciliation program. It's going to be on this Wednesday on March 4th and again on March 18th. It's called Leaving the Light On. And we are all called, after reflecting upon what is heavy on our hearts, to bring that to the sacrament of reconciliation, so that through reconciliation we can leave that behind and draw closer to God. But that requires us to take the first step, to have the courage to face what it is that is separating us from God. Make no mistake, just as Abraham was tested by God and called to raise that dagger and be prepared to plunge it into the chest of his only son, it may just be that difficult for some of us to walk through that reconciliation room door. We don't want to face what it is that we know is standing between us and God. But make no mistake, if there is a distance between you and God, you're the one who moved. God is where he has always been and where he always will be, standing ready to shower you with his grace, with boundless mercy and forgiveness, and waiting for us all with open arms of love. But it requires us to take the first step. Don't let this Lenten season pass you by. Don't squander the opportunity to truly invest yourself in the grace of the Lenten season, so that when Easter comes and we celebrate Christ's victory over death and our reconciliation to the Father, you can join that celebration with great joy. The Lenten season is all about the journey, but it starts with you first discerning, where are you coming from? And remember where it is you want to go.